My son has spent the last 11 months telling this family that I have dementia. Last week I passed a Department of Transportation physical, cognitive screen included, and when I slid the certificate across my own kitchen table, my sister looked at it, and then she looked at me, and she said gently, like you'd talk to a child, "Honey, those tests aren't for this." That's when I understood the hole was already dug. All I'd done was climb down into it holding paperwork. I'm Hollis. I'm kuusi kuusi. I drove a truck for 39 years long haul out of Memphis when I was young and stupid, then regional, then the last 14 years on a dedicated route out of Bowling Green, Kentucky, same lanes, same docks, same Waffle House on Wednesday. I hung it up in 2024 with a clean record. Not clean-ish. Clean, 39 years over 3 million miles, 0 preventable accidents, and the only thing wrong with me when I parked that truck for the last time was a hip that sounds like gravel and a bad opinion of most four-wheelers. My wife Carol died in 2019, pancreatic. 14 weeks from the scan to the funeral, which is not enough time for anything, and I'm not going to talk much about it except for one detail, because that detail is a loaded gun in this story, and my son is going to fire it. Carol's birthday was October 9th. The first year after she passed, the family made a thing of it, a dinner, candles, everybody crying into a cake she wasn't there to cut. It broke me in half. So in 2021 I told everyone, plainly, at Sunday dinner, I love you all, but I'm done marking October 9th. I visit her in May, on our anniversary, by myself, and that's mine, and the 9th of October is just going to be a Thursday from now on. Everybody nodded. My sister Deanie cried a little and said she understood. Remember that. Everybody was in the room. Everybody heard me say it. My son is Bracken. He's 38. He sells commercial flooring schools, hospitals, big bids, and he's good at it, because Bracken has been good at talking since he could stand. He's married to Jill, who I love like my own, and they've got 2 kids, Sadie and Ren, 9 and 6, and I would walk through fire in my church shoes for those girls. I keep their drawings on my refrigerator. I keep their school pictures in my truck visor where other men keep their fuel cards. I'm telling you all this because I need you to understand that I am not writing this about an enemy. I'm writing it about my boy. And 11 months ago, my boy started killing me. Slowly, politely, with his hand on my shoulder, in front of people who love us both. It started at Thanksgiving, a year ago. Small, so small I'm the only one who could have caught it, and I didn't. We're all at Deanie's. 18 people, and I told a story about a blowout I had outside Texarkana in the 90s. It's a good story. I've told it before everybody my age has told every story before. That's what stories are for. And Bracken laughed along, and then he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said to the table, warm as gravy. He told this one at the fish fry too, word for word. It's honestly kind of amazing. And everybody chuckled, including me, because what is that? That's nothing. That's a son ribbing his old man. Except I wasn't at the fish fry. I'd had a doctor's appointment for the hip and I skipped it. And I remember because Deanie brought me a plate after. I didn't tell that story at the fish fry because I wasn't at the fish fry. And I sat there with a fork in my hand doing the math. And by the time I'd done it, the conversation had moved on. And correcting it would have been a whole production, and I let it go. That's the machine. I want you to see the machine, because it took me months. Every single thing Bracken said about me was small, warm, unfalsifiable in the moment, and delivered to an audience. Never to my face. Never a fight. You can't fight a hand on your shoulder. Through the winter and spring it picked up. I'll give you the greatest hits. February, at Ren's birthday party, I called their dog by their old dog's name. Once. The dogs are both black labs. Sue me. And Bracken caught Jill's eye across the room, and did a thing with his mouth, not a smile, a wince, and later I heard him in the kitchen saying, "Lo, it's the 3rd time this month." It was not the 3rd time this month. It was the first time ever, and I know that, and I also know how I sound saying I know that, and that right there is the trap. The trap is that defending yourself is a symptom. April, I drove to Nashville to see an old dispatch buddy, and I didn't tell anybody, because I'm a grown man and it's 100 miles. Bracken called Deanie worried sick. By the time I got home, there'd been a family text thread going for 6 hours about whether somebody should call the highway patrol, about a man who drove 3 million miles for a living, going to Nashville. May, Mother's Day, Somebody mentioned Carol, and I got quiet because it was Mother's Day, and my wife is dead, and quiet is what a man gets. And Bracken squeezed my shoulder and said to his aunt, just loud enough, he's been having more of these foggy spells. Foggy spells. I was grieving at a holiday table. He renamed it a symptom, out loud, with a squeeze. And then October 9th. Carol's birthday. The Thursday I told everyone 3 years ago in plain English that I would not be marking. Bracken called me that evening. Sweet as pie. Just checking on you, Dad, big day. I said I was fine, watching the ball game. And 2 days later, at Sunday dinner, my sister Deanie, my own sister, 70 years old, who has known me since the day I was born, leaned over and patted my hand and said, Bracken told us you forgot Carol's birthday, sweetheart. It's okay. It's okay. I said, Deanie, I didn't forget it. I don't celebrate it. I stood in your dining room in 2021 and told every one of you exactly that. You cried. You said you understood. And my sister, and this is the moment the floor moved. My sister looked at me with love, total love, no meanness in it anywhere, and I watched her decide that my perfectly accurate memory of a real event was the confusion, because the story she'd been fed for months made my accuracy impossible. And she gave me a look I had never seen on her face in 66 years, and she said, okay, honey, okay. Okay, honey, okay. You want to know what it's like? I'll tell you exactly what it's like, because I've had a year to work on the words. It's like being buried standing up, one shovelful at a time, by a man who hugs you between shovelfuls, in front of a crowd that thinks the shovel is a gift. Now, here's the part where I have to be honest about myself, because you all can smell it when a man's not. It worked on me too, for a while. Along about March, I started checking. I'd hang up a phone call and immediately replay it, auditing myself. I bought one of those little notebooks and started writing down what I did each day, not because anybody told me to, but so I'd have proof. A 66-year-old man, keeping a log to prove to himself that he existed correctly. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and test myself on my own route from 2015, exit numbers. Dock door assignments at a distribution center in Shepherdsville. I still have them all, by the way, everyone. That's what this does to a person. That's the part the family never sees. They see Bracken being loving and Dad being defensive, and they never see Dad alone in his kitchen at 3 a.m., reciting exit numbers to nobody. The medical card was Deanie's fault, in a roundabout way. God love her. In June, after the okay honey okay, I got mad in a way I hadn't been mad since I don't know when. Cold mad. Trucker mad. Carol used to call it the kind where you get very quiet and very organized. And I thought, fine. You want to talk about my brain? Let's get a ruling from people whose job it is. A Department of Transportation physical is not nothing. People think it's an eye chart. It's not. It's a federal medical examination by a certified examiner, blood pressure, vision, hearing, and if there's any question about you at all, a cognitive screen. I told the examiner straight out, my family thinks I'm slipping. I want the works. Document everything. She was maybe 45, seen it all, didn't blink. She gave me the works. I passed everything. She wrote no cognitive deficits observed in the notes, because I asked her to write down whatever she found, good or bad, and that's what she found. 2-year card. I put the certificate in an envelope, and I carried it to Sunday dinner like a man carrying his own pardon, and I slid it across the table to Deanie, in front of everybody, and I said, read it out loud. And my sister picked it up, and read it, and set it down, and looked at me with all that love, and said, honey, those tests aren't for this. And Bracken, I want you to hear this, because it's the finest work he did all year. Bracken didn't gloat. He looked pained. He looked like it hurt him, and he said, soft, to the whole table, Dad, the fact that you went and did this is kind of what we're talking about. Do you see it? Do you see the shape of that? The evidence of my sanity became the symptom. A federal medical examination became concerning behavior. There is no exit from a room built like that. Anything I said was denial. Anything I proved was fixation. My silence was decline, and my anger was decline, and my calm was decline. I drove home that night and sat in my truck in my own driveway for an hour. And I'm not ashamed to tell you that a 66-year-old man sat in a Silverado and cried, because the thing I finally understood was, This has a destination. Nobody builds a road like this to nowhere. My son was not confused about me. My son was not worried about me. My son was building something, one warm little brick at a time, and I did not yet know what. And that not knowing was the worst hour of my life since a doctor said the word pancreatic. So I stopped defending and started investigating. 39 years of pre-trip inspections teaches you one thing that saved me here. You don't argue with a gauge. You find out why the gauge reads what it reads. The first gauge was money. Bracken had started, around midsummer, offering to help with the bills. Then in August he showed up with paperwork. Casual, folder on the counter, talking about the girls' soccer the whole time. A durable power of attorney, financial, naming him. Just so somebody can act fast if anything ever happens, Dad. Jill's dad had a stroke, remember? And it was a nightmare. Jill's dad, Dr. Farrell, hold on to that name. I didn't, not then. I told Bracken I'd look it over, and I put it in a drawer. And then I did something my boy did not know I knew how to do, because to Bracken, his father is a man who drove a truck and can't work the smart TV. I went down to the county clerk's office in person, because paper talks to paper people, and I asked the girl at the counter how I'd find out if anything had ever been filed concerning me. Liens, judgments, anything with my name on it. Nothing on me, but you can search any name in those indexes. So I searched my son's. There's a judgment, filed in this county, March of this year, an equipment finance company against Del Ostrander and Bracken, jointly. Del Ostrander is my son's best friend. Since high school, you'd know the type. Big plans, big watch, always one deal from Rich. In 2023, Del started a polished concrete outfit, and my son co-signed the equipment. Grinders, a ride-on machine, a truck, $140,000. Del is gone. Not dead gone. Phone off, house sold. Last anybody heard he was in Florida. And the finance company did what finance companies do, which is read the paper with 2 names on it and go after the name that still has an address. $140,000 against a flooring salesman with a mortgage and 2 kids in activities. I stood in that records room, and I felt 2 things at the exact same time, and I'm going to tell you both because they're both true. The first was relief. God help me, relief. Because there it was, a reason, a mechanism, proof that I wasn't crazy, that the gauge read low because there was a leak. And the second thing was grief like a dropped engine block. Because my boy was drowning. My boy had been drowning for a year, and instead of coming to his father, and I would have helped him, hear me, I would have figured something out. That's what fathers are for, instead of one hard, honest conversation at my kitchen table. My son looked at his drowning, and looked at me, and decided the cheapest life raft in the county was his father's mind. I have $340,000 in retirement savings, 39 years of it, and a paid-off house, and a son who needs 140, who can't get it while I'm competent, and who has spent 11 months telling everyone I'm not. A lot of you are going to ask why I didn't drive straight to his house that night. I'll tell you why. Because I had exactly one advantage, and it was that Bracken believed the story he'd built. He believed his father was a fading old man who couldn't work a smart TV. A fading old man doesn't visit records rooms. A fading old man doesn't keep his powder dry. So I kept being exactly who he needed me to be for 6 more weeks, and I hated every day of it, and it was the right call. Here's what those 6 weeks looked like. I hired an elder law attorney in Louisville, a woman named Well. Her name's not important, but she'd been doing this 22 years, and when I laid it out, she stopped me about halfway through and said, "Mr. Hollis, has anyone in your family used the word guardianship yet?" And I said no, and she said, "They will, and when they file, they'll need medical evidence. Watch for the doctor. There's always a doctor. There's always a doctor." I updated everything. New will, new advance directive, and a durable power of attorney of my own naming Deanie's oldest boy, my nephew Court, a quiet CPA in Elizabethtown, who has never once in his life been exciting, which is exactly what you want in a fiduciary. My attorney had me do something else too, and I want every gray-haired person listening to write this down. She had me get a full neuropsychological evaluation, private, at a clinic in Louisville. 4 hours, puzzles and word lists, and drawing clocks till my hand cramped. Not because anybody doubted me, because now there was a dated, comprehensive, specialist-signed baseline that said, in 12 pages, that Hollis is fine. A dot card can be waved away at a dinner table. 12 pages from a neuropsychologist cannot be waved away in a courtroom. And then, in early November, the thing my attorney said would happen, happened. Deanie called me, crying, and asked me to come to lunch. And at that lunch, my sister, who I want to be clear was a tool in this and not a blade. And I've forgiven her. Mostly, we're working on it, my sister told me the family had met. About me. At Bracken's house, the Sunday before, everyone but me. And that Bracken had told them it was time to get Dad some protections, and that it might get hard, and that Dad would fight it, because they always fight it. That's part of the disease. That's part of the disease. Whatever I did was the disease. My son had built a story where my resistance to being robbed was a symptom of the condition that justified robbing me. And then Deanie said the sentence that cracked the whole thing open. She was trying to comfort me. She said, "And honey, it's not just us being worried. There's a letter from a doctor." I said, real slow, "What doctor, Deanie? I haven't seen a doctor except my hip man and the DOT examiner in 2 years." And my sister got a funny look, the first honest confusion I'd seen on her in a year, and she said, "Well, Bracken has it, from back in September, last year. It says, honey, it says moderate cognitive impairment. It's from Dr. Farrell." Dr. Farrell, Jill's father, my son's father-in-law. The stroke story from the power of attorney pitch. Internal medicine, semi-retired, nice fellow, wears a fishing shirt to Thanksgiving. I have never been that man's patient. I have never set foot in his building. I have never had so much as a blood pressure cuff on my arm within 50 feet of Dr. Farrell. The only medicine that has ever passed between us is that he once told me to take fish oil, at a cookout, unsolicited, the way doctors do. There was a letter, on real letterhead, with a real signature, dated September of last year, a full year of groundwork ago, stating that Hollis presents with moderate cognitive impairment and lacks capacity for complex financial decisions. Okay, this is the part I've written 4 times, because I need to get the weight of it right. My attorney got a copy of the letter. I'm not going to get into the how. There was a records request and some maneuvering, and it doesn't matter. What matters is I sat in her office on a Tuesday and held it in my hands. 1 page, 3 paragraphs. My name, spelled right. My date of birth, correct, based on my clinical observation of the patient. Moderate cognitive impairment, lacks capacity. Signed, sloppy and confident, the way doctors sign. And my attorney watched me read it. And then she said the thing that reframed the entire year. "Mr. Hollis, do you understand what this actually is? Forget your family for a minute. A physician wrote a capacity opinion about a man who has never been his patient. No examination, no chart, no appointment. If that letter was written the way you say as a favor, then it's not just the centerpiece of a fraudulent guardianship attempt. It's his medical license. He put his license on 1 page of paper and handed it to your son. And I sat there, and something clicked that had been grinding for a year, and I asked her to pull up the date on the letter again, and she read it out. And I said, "Ma'am, I know exactly where those 2 men were within a few days of that date, because I was there too. Labor Day weekend, last year, Bracken's backyard. The whole family, Dr. Farrell in his fishing shirt at the grill, my son next to him, the 2 of them off by the fence for a long while with beers, and Farrell tapping at his phone, and I remember it. I remember it because Sadie asked me why Daddy looked upset, and I told her grown-ups, just get like that at barbecues. I found out later, and this came from Jill, and I'll get to Jill, because Jill is the hinge this whole story turns on, that my son stood at that fence and told his father-in-law he was in trouble, real trouble, the Dell kind of trouble, and that the only asset in the family was locked up behind Dad's situation, and that all the lawyers needed was a letter, just to start the process, just a formality, and nobody would ever really scrutinize it, and Farrell, because his son-in-law was in a jam, because his grandbaby's house was on the line, because it was a barbecue, and the beer was cold, and it's just a letter typed it on his phone, standing by the fence, in about 4 minutes, and emailed it to himself, to put on letterhead Monday. 4 minutes. 11 months of my life. My sister looking at me like a stranger. Me at 3 a.m., reciting exit numbers to an empty kitchen. 4 minutes at a barbecue. So now I'm holding 1 piece of paper that can end 2 men. My attorney laid out the road. The letter goes to the court if they file, and it collapses because I have a 12-page private neuropsych eval and a dot screen, and the small problem that Farrell has no chart, no records, no appointment, nothing a capacity opinion conjured from a fence post. And then the same letter goes to the state medical board, where wrote a fraudulent capacity finding to facilitate a guardianship is the kind of sentence that ends a 40-year career in one hearing. And depending on how a prosecutor's coffee tasted that morning, it maybe goes further than that, for both of them. 2 men, 1 page, my hand, and one of those men is my son, and the other one is my granddaughter's other grandpa, and those 2 little girls have exactly 2 grandfathers on this earth, and I was sitting in a law office holding the means to take both of us away from them at once. I want to tell you what I did, and then you're going to tell me whether I did right, because I genuinely do not know, and it's been keeping me up. I did not go to the court. I did not go to the board. Not first. I called a family meeting. Same script Bracken used, same cast Deanie, her boys, the aunts, everybody who'd been at his meeting except I held mine at my house, at my kitchen table, the one Carol and I bought in 1987, and I invited Bracken and Jill last, by which I mean I invited them once everyone else had already said yes, so there was no version where he could get ahead of it. 11 months, he'd had the room to himself. I figured I was owed one Sunday. And when they were all sitting there, I didn't give a speech. I passed out folders. Truck stop habit. You want people to believe a route. Hand them the map. Folder had 4 things. The DOT certificate. The 12-page neuropsychological evaluation, results page on top, where it says, in specialist language, that there is no impairment of any kind. The county judgment Del Ostrander and my son, $140,000, filed in March. And last, the letter. Farrell's letter. With a 1-page affidavit from my attorney behind it stating that a records request confirmed I have never been a patient of that practice. No appointment. No chart. No visit. Ever. And I sat at the head of my own table, and I said one thing. I said, take your time. I drove trucks for 39 years. I'm real comfortable with quiet. I watched my sister read. I watched Deanie get to the judgment and put her hand flat on the table like the room was tilting. I watched her get to the letter, and then to the affidavit, and then look up, not at me, at Bracken. And I watched my sister's face do in 4 seconds what mine had been doing for 11 months. That's an ugly thing to want, and I wanted it, and I got it, and it didn't feel like I thought it would. It felt like watching somebody else's building burn and remembering it's on your street. Bracken stood up. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said the debt was temporary. He said the letter was, and here his voice did something I'd never heard it do. It went up. It went young. He said the letter was just to have options. And Jill, who had been reading her folder in complete silence, looked up at her husband and said 5 words I will hear for the rest of my life. Your dad was never sick? She didn't know. I want that on every record there is. Jill did not know. She knew about Dell. She'd been living inside that fear for a year, the house, the girls, all of it. But her husband had told her the guardianship idea came from doctors. And her father had never mentioned the letter, because you don't mention a thing like that to your daughter, you just do it at a fence and put it on letterhead Monday and tell yourself it's paperwork. Jill is the one who called her father that night from my driveway, and I could hear her end of it through the truck window, and I'm not going to repeat it, but I will say I have never heard a fishing shirt man get taken apart like that in my life, and it was his own daughter doing it, and she did it holding the affidavit. Here's where everything landed. It's been about 4 months. I never filed the board complaint. My attorney has it drafted, signed, sitting in a folder, and Dr. Farrell knows it exists, because Jill told him it exists. And here's what that piece of paper did without ever being mailed. Farrell retired, fully, quietly, closed out his license voluntarily in January, after a long and fulfilling career. A voluntary surrender can't unhappen. A man who retires can't write a second letter about anybody, ever. My attorney says I gave up leverage and maybe justice. Maybe I did. But I keep coming back to Sadie and Ren, and to the fact that the version where I mail that envelope is the version where their 2 grandpas get marched through a public hearing holding each other's crimes, and I couldn't find the win in it for anybody under 4 feet tall. The guardianship died before it was born. Nothing was ever filed. There was nothing left to file with. The money, and this is the part half of you are going to yell at me about, so let's get to it. I paid Dell's judgment, not for Bracken. I want to be precise. Because the precision is the whole point. I sat my son down, alone, at that same table, with Court the CPA on my side of it, and I told him, I'm not giving you $140,000. I am buying the debt. It's mine now. You owe it to me, in writing, with a lien against your equity and a payment schedule Court drafted, and you will pay it back at an interest rate that will annoy you every single month. And the first time you're 60 days late, I sell the note to a collector and sleep fine. And in exchange, that finance company gets out of your life, your girls keep their house, and you and I are square on money forever, because there will never be any more of it. Ever. I changed the will. He knows what's in it. The girls know nothing, and they're in it plenty. He signed. He cried when he signed, and I let him, and I did not get up and go around the table, and that was the hardest 10 feet I never walked. Bracken and me. People keep asking Deanie, and Deanie keeps asking me, so I'll say it here. He's my son. He makes his payment on the 1st of the month, and he brings the girls on Saturdays, and we are careful with each other, like two men sharing a kitchen after a fire. He has apologized, really apologized. The kind where a man names what he did without a single but in the sentence, and it took him until February to get there, and I made him do it twice, once to me, and once to Deanie, because Deanie is the one who patted my hand and said, okay, honey, okay, and he's the one who put that in her. Do I trust him? No, not yet. Trust is a rebuild, and I've rebuilt engines. You don't ask a rebuild to run like it never threw a rod. You run it easy, and you listen to it. That's what we're doing. We're running easy and listening. And Deanie, my sister, came to my house the week after the folders, and she stood in my kitchen and cried and said, I looked at you like you were gone. I looked at my own brother like he was already gone, and I hugged her and told her the truth, which is that it wasn't her fault. The machine was built by a professional. And she said the thing that I think might be the whole lesson of this entire year. She said, he never once asked us to believe anything big. That's how he did it. It was always something small enough to be true. Always something small enough to be true. Put that on a warning label somewhere. Last thing, in March I took a driving job. Part-time, 2 days a week, a dedicated run to Lexington and back for a food distributor. My hip complains and the money's nothing, and I have never needed anything more in my life. First morning, I did my pre-trip in the dark lights, air, tires, the whole walk-around, same as 3 million miles worth of mornings, and I got up into that seat and pulled out my medical card and clipped it to the visor, right next to Sadie and Ren. Passed. Dated. Cognitive screen included. Those tests aren't for this, my sister said. She was right, in a way she didn't mean. No test is for this. There's no exam for whether your own boy will look at you and see a bank. So tell me, because 4 months on I still argue both sides at 3 a.m. Was I wrong to bury that board complaint? A doctor invented a diagnosis for a man he never examined, and his punishment was a comfortable retirement, and I chose that outcome for the sake of 2 little girls. Some of you are going to say the next old man Farrell's kind of favor gets aimed at won't have a records room and a stubborn streak, and that I owed that stranger the complaint. I hear you. I do. Was I wrong to pay the judgment even as a loan, even with a lien? Or did I just teach my son that the raft shows up no matter what he does to the ship? And the real one, the one I can't lay down. My son spent 11 months telling a family I'm losing my mind, and the first thing he said when the folders came out was, it's not what it looks like. If your child did that, not a stranger, not an in-law, your child, is there a road back? Because I'm on one, and I chose it. And some mornings I stand at that kitchen table, and I still can't tell you if it's a road or just a longer way of leaving. What would you have done?